But the next unit we'll do the vertebral column as well as the upper limb. So this is giving you an overview of the whole skeletal system. And we're just studying the bones of the vertebral column today. But the vertebral column is a part of the skeletal system just called the axial skeleton. And that's highlighted in blue on the figure. And it includes, the axis of your trunk, the axis of your skeleton, including the skull from the top. It's hard to see, but there's a little bone floating in your jaw. It's important for the larynx and the voice box. It's called the hyoid bone. It sits right under here. If you look on the skeleton, you can look at it, or you can feel it in your neck. I'll show you a picture later. Your hyoid, it's the only bone that does not articulate to any other bone. Articulate is the word we use that means connect. A bone connects to another. This one does not. One way is skull, hyoid, but you also have then, of course, the vertebral column, your spine. The rest of the skeleton are basically your arms and your legs. Okay, and the bones of your arms, the bones of your legs. We'll do the bones of the upper limb in this unit. But today I just want to focus on just the vertebral column. So if you isolate it, it looks like that. Now, the vertebral column is a column of vertebra, simply put. The vertebra, the E pluralizes it, okay? Because you can see, well, what a vertebra is, they're your backbones, right? In terms of organization, they're arranged from top to bottom, 5 different regions. Going from top to bottom, the top, the superior, the superiormost region is the cervical region. These first 7. So the top 7, cervical region. You can abbreviate it with the letter C. So since there's 7, you can enumerate them C1 to C7. Okay. And then below that, well, first of all, understand cervix means neck. So these are the backbones of your neck. And then you have your chest region. And the spine of your chest, those are the thoracic vertebra. And that's T1 to T12. Thoracic. Now it's spelled thoracic, C-I-C, but it's pronounced thoracic. So the first C is an S sound, the second C is a hard C sound. And abbreviated with the letter T. So you got T1 to T12. So this is basically your chest. It's part of it. These articulate with your ribs. So put ribs with that. Your rib cage. And then your lower back, you have the big lumbar vertebra. There's 5 of them. Abbreviated with the letter L, L1 to L5. Basically, it's your lower back. Below that, you've got this curved bone and tailbone. The sacrum and coccyx, they're all fused together, but consider them separately. Trouble out in here. So you have 5 sacral vertebra, abbreviated letter S, so call them S1 to S5. And then usually you have a variable amount. Usually you have something like 4, maybe 2 to 4 coccygeal vertebra. Coccygeal. Abbreviated CO. So CO1 to CO4. If you add those up, 33 backbones. Well, anyways, the bottom regions here, these are fused. They're fused maybe by, some books say age 17, some books say age 25, something like that. Young adulthood, they completely fuse together. So they don't move. It's not a flexible part of the spine. Okay, but these top regions, we say they are movable. And notice that in models, like when you study in the lab, there's like these little wedges between the backbones. They're called the bodies of the vertebra. That kind of like these little wedges between the bodies are called the intervertebral discs, and they allow this to be more movable. Intervertebral discs. Now the discs are fibrocartilaginous. They're not bone, but we'll teach them as part of the anatomy for this system. Fibrocartilaginous. So these discs are wedged between vertebral bodies. That's why I say this is the body's vertical axis, supports rib cage. It's the point of attachment for the pelvic girdle, protects the spinal cord. You can flex trunk. You can extend trunk. Because it's movable. Flex forward is reaching down and touching your toes and then sort of standing right back up. You can bend from side to side. They call that lateral flexion. And you can rotate your trunk like so. So there's different ways you can move your trunk. That's because these top 3 regions are movable with discs, with these fibrocartilaginous with discs that allow you to flex and bend and so forth and so on. But that last bullet point you should write down too. That's the main job. You protect the spinal cord, which is inside there. So you have to kind of know how that fits in. It's an important function. The vertebral column provides protection of the spinal cord. In addition to providing an axis for turning and bending your body, it's protecting the nervous system. Okay, I'm going to start to erase some of this. You know, when I teach anatomy, I use the app a lot. I haven't used it yet, so you're like, what app? This one. So I got the skeleton there. What this allows me to do is to show things a little better than I normally can. So first of all, one thing, you see how like there's a space between the vertebral bodies? There's nothing there because I only have the skeletal system turned on. Right? But normally that's filled with an intervertebral disc, forms a joint between vertebral bodies. If I isolate the vertebral column, I just kind of tap anywhere on it. I get a trail of breadcrumbs at the top. I'll just highlight vertebral column. So now it's highlighted in green, and I'll hide others. So I'm just looking at the vertebral column. So when you look at it from the front, it's completely vertical. But when you look at it from the side, there's all these curvatures in the adult spine, and you have to know what those are and how we describe it. So the curvatures. Kind of like, I'll exaggerate a little bit, it's kind of like that. Noggin at the top, the arms are hanging around here. Okay, a crude drawing. But just to teach you the curvatures. It curves this way, then it curves that way, and we have ways to name it, but to name our regions, it's like, okay, you got cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, coccyx. Okay. Now, your spine, when it develops in gestation, during the fetal, when you're in the fetal position in the womb, your spine curves one way, this way, just like that, one curvature. Cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacrum, coccyx. And there's you know, in the womb, in the fetal position, right? So this curvature, we describe as the primary curvature because it was there first. It formed first in development. How we describe it is pretend your eyeballs here and you're looking from the anterior view. When it curves away from you, that's concave, as opposed to curving out towards you, that will be convex. So we describe this curvature as a concave anterior. I mean, you could just describe it by looking at it from the back, and you just call it convex posterior. It would just be a different way of saying the same thing. Now, as you're born and things start to happen, the other curvatures come secondarily. Secondary curvatures. Like when baby starts to hold head up, you'll start to develop the curvature in your neck there. Okay. So cervical comes second. That curvature, secondary curvature in the cervical region comes when baby holds head up. Starts to develop there. Then, as toddler starts to walk, the lumbar spine will take that curvature. Lumbar. Toddler begins to walk. Around 18 months, 2 years, something like that. So that's why they're called the secondary curvatures. They come later. And but their curvatures are different. They're not concave anterior. They would be concave posterior, right? So you look at it from the back. There or there. Does that look like an eyeball? I'm trying to draw an eyeball, looking at it from the back. You describe the secondary curvatures as concave posterior. Let me put that here. So concave posterior. Now, concave anterior, the primary curvatures, well, the thoracic and the sacral curvatures, they're primary. They're there from the start and they don't change throughout life. So, sacral and thoracic, remember it's CIC but pronounced thoracic, not thoracic. Okay, I heard that a lot in lab. So, primary curvatures are the sacral and the thoracic regions. And they have a concave anterior, that's how you describe the curvature, okay? And then the secondary curvatures are the cervical and lumbar regions, and they have a concave posterior orientation. That's how we describe the normal curvatures of the spine. So let me go back here, the PowerPoint show. The next slide is just what I noted earlier, how you can flex the spine, extend the spine, rotate the spine. And this is showing you the normal spinal development. Okay, pretend it's a test. What kind of curvature is that, primary or secondary? That's the primary, but then as you grow up, you get the secondary ones that form. Okay. The term lordosis and kyphosis also describe kind of bending that way or that way. Usually I use those terms to describe an excess curvature of the spine, like shown here. So let's talk about some abnormal curvatures of the spine that need to be treated. Did any of you, like, you don't have to volunteer this information, any of you actually like to see the chiropractor? Anybody? Yes, a few people. When they adjust your spine, it feels good, doesn't it? I mean, that's what they're doing. They're trying to, like, I don't know. I don't know that profession, but I just know the one time I went to one, the guy cracked my back, and I was like, whoa, I feel great. They're trying to adjust these curvatures and adjust the backbones to the line. These are clearly missing. Okay, let me show you what they're trying to teach you here. Find a different color. Red. Okay, let's say that in the thoracic it curves way out too much, like a hunchback. They call that a thoracic kyphosis, the middle picture. So I'll call this abnormal curvatures. A thoracic kyphosis. Some causes could be, remember when we talked about the wedge fractures from osteoporosis in that region? They can kind of wedge in and give you the hunchback. That could be a cause. Osteoporotic vertebra have wedge fractures. See the elderly lady in the middle, maybe that's the condition there. Or you can have an excess curvature, maybe too much in that region. Okay, like the call that a lordosis, the woman on the right, and lumbar lordosis. Is a curvature exaggerated in the other way? So sometimes they call the thoracic kyphosis a hunchback. Sometimes they call the lumbar lordosis a swayback. That could be due to too much weight in the front. The body center of gravity, okay, any object on Earth has one point that's its center of gravity, and that's the point at which gravity pulls you down. And in humans, it's a little bit by the belly button in that region. So if you have too much weight up top, it throws off your center of gravity, so it pulls you forward. So what do you do to compensate? You lean back. You walk around like this, and you know, got a 10-pound baby in there. It could cause this. Okay, it's called sway back. Could be caused by excess weight anteriorly. That first picture is a lateral curvature of the spine. That's a scoliosis, so I can't really illustrate it there because it's a side view. But the pictures, you can tell it's crooked laterally, right? Point to this here, the scoliosis. A lateral curvature of the spine causes, sometimes if there's they call it asymmetric weakness of muscles. If muscles are weaker on one side than the other, left compared to right, it can kind of pull the spine. And if it happens during development, during puberty, they'll check for it in gym class. If you bend over with a crooked spine, one of your shoulders will pop up, right? So they have you bend over, and if one shoulder is more prominent, then the gym teacher is supposed to notice that and take note. And okay, and it's all treatable, but know the abnormal curvatures of the spine. I remember when I took anatomy, they had this big study group, which was the worst idea ever. And it was like 20 of us in this guy's apartment. And when you have a study group like that, you're not getting anything done. I didn't realize it at the time. But the one thing I remember, this guy, he goes, yeah, come on, show him that thing you showed me. And he goes, oh, okay. Kyphosis, lordosis, scoliosis. And that's the only thing I remember from that study group. So that worked. Number 25 years later. Other things about the spine, I want you to know this structure here, the intervertebral foramina, these little holes in the side. You see my model of the spine here? You see those yellow things coming out the side on this model? Those are the spinal nerves. So what I want you to know is that the intervertebral foramina, that's where the spinal nerves exit the vertebral column. Intervertebral foramina. Foramina, a foramen is a hole, so a foramina is a small hole. Now in this picture they show the wedges in there, the little fibrocartilaginous intervertebral discs. Spinal nerves exit the vertebral column here. So using that app again, if I just really zoom in, let me turn on the nervous system and just look, and you can tell, see something pop out of there. So you see those yellow things coming out of the side? Right here. So this space, if I have you identify the hole, call it intervertebral foramina, but what's that called? Spinal nerve. So that way you don't confuse it with cranial nerves, which we'll get to. Cranial nerves exit the skull, spinal nerves exit there. Okay, turn that back off. Sometimes I use the apple and I think I can show things a little better. There's a blank picture you can study. The next thing I want you to know is because all the vertebrae are stacked on top of one another in a column, they form what's called the vertebral canal that encases the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord is actually only about 18 inches long. It doesn't go completely from top to bottom. It stops at about the level of L2. But note, vertebral canal, it contains spinal cord. The spinal cord end at about the level of L1, L2-ish. This is the thoracic region now. Where I put the red arrow, I'm trying to show you where it is. Anteriorly, you have the vertebral bodies that are the weight-bearing function. But just behind it is this canal. Now the canal is formed by successively stacked vertebral foramen. Let me write that on the board and I'll show you. Formed by successively stacked vertebral foramen. So let me check that structure. Let me show you what I mean by that using the app. So what I'll do is I'll just tap on one vertebra and I'll hit the isolate button so I can just show it to you by itself. Do hide others and get rid of that green color. So that's a lateral view. It's a front view. So if you look at it superiorly, do you see a hole? Let me point it out. I always like to say, do you see it? And then I kind of confirm that. That's the hole. Stack a bunch of those on top of one another, you've got a canal. Okay. So let me tap on a few vertebrae so you see what I mean by that. I'm going to use what's called, where's that multi-select function? Okay, multi-select. I'm going to select a few of them there. How about 4? I'm going to hide others. So I've got 4 here, and I like, they have this explode feature. So if I like explode them apart, you can kind of look, you can kind of see down. So that when they assemble back together, you can see how, well basically I'm trying to show you what a vertebral canal is. Okay. Exit that. Show him. When we have lab time today, we have vertebral columns that are strung together. And you can just kind of look down and say, oh yeah, I can see how all those vertebral foramen line up. And these are real bones, by the way. They're not models. So you're dealing with human remains. So be extremely careful. I always use carpet to put it down on the hard surface. And if you point to things, use these wood sticks that we got in the lab. So if you use a pen, you're going to mark our human bones. And I'm not going to like you very much. So don't do that. Here's a picture. This is what it looks like when you cut a disc, which I've done. It looks really great when you cut it open the first time. You can see it fresh. The arrangement of the disc is you have this fibrocartilage surrounding this pulpy center called the nucleus pulposus. So let's talk about disc structure. Intervertebral disc. Technically not part of the skeletal system. I mentioned it here. Okay, so know the Annulus Fibrosus. You don't have to know the inner zone, outer zone thing. Just know that it's made out of fibrocartilage, which we studied before. Annulus Fibrosus. Like circular rings on a tree. When you look at a tree stump in cross section. It's made out of fibrocartilage. Do you remember that that's the one that had that zigzag design? Like it zigs like this, and it zags like that, and it zigs like this. Remember we talked about that before? Yeah. That helps resist, when it gets crushed, it can resist the tension in both orientations. But in the middle is that nucleus pulposus. It's like a gooey center. I'm not even sure what's in it. It's just like the jelly in a jelly donut. It's kind of like, it acts like kind of a ball bearing. I've seen it described that way. And as you bend your spine, like for example, if I bend forward, my vertebra are kind of like crushing it in front, and it pushes the nucleus pulposus back. So that's why bending forward is bad posture. And in fact, I remember one lecture, we had a guest physical therapist. He said, maybe I said this before, imagine if there's a tub of water in your chest, and it's full to the top, and any movement that spills the water, like bending, oh, it's bad. Because all your life, especially in the lower region, if you keep pushing this nucleus pulposus posteriorly, these will rupture. And if you get a rupture, the nucleus pulposus may impinge on a nerve, causing a lot of pain or maybe some spasm. So know what a herniated disc is too. Herniation. Herniation means it's a blowout, okay? Sometimes it's called a slipped disc. I put slipped in quotation marks. Because as you can see, nothing really slipped, just something is oozing out. A herniation describes it better. Maybe you'll see it as a bulge on an MRI. You see a bulge popping out between the two vertebrae. Maybe L5, S1 is a popular one, or S4, S5. Okay, way down here, which bears the most weight. So I want to talk about the movable regions, and then this figure from the Marriott textbook. They show you the 7. And hey, that's the neck. There's the chest, there's the 12, and there's the 5. So remember 7, 12, 5, just like the times of day you eat. You eat breakfast at 7, eat lunch at 12, and eat dinner at 5. Just to help you remember the number of vertebrae in the movable regions. And it's your job to be able to study an individual backbone that's not labeled. Oh, a piece broke off here. Yeah, that's the lumbar region. See how this is the biggest one, but see how small it is? Oh, this is the thoracic region. Yeah, it looks, yeah, okay. Here's my little neck bone. Oh yeah, that's cervical, I can tell. I have to teach you how to tell. So that's what we have in lab. These are very small bones. Please take care of them. The process of getting dry bones, and you have to appreciate it. I kind of know a little bit about it. One time I actually saw it happen. I was at the coroner's office. I go there a lot. That's where they got the cadavers, or I can dissect them sometimes. And someone donated their body for bones, and what they do is they get off all of the flesh that they can, and they look bright red because they still have a lot of fluids in them. And then they let the domestic bugs, the flesh-eating beetles, they leave them in a terrarium, and the beetles just do their work, and they eat all the flesh, and they treat them more. So what you're getting is just dry bones. There's no organic components in it. Okay. So appreciate the process and see the bones carefully. Okay, well anyways, before I teach you how to tell the different vertebra from the different regions, you have to know the general structure that all vertebrae generally have. So call this general structure of a vertebra, just one little backbone. What do they all have in common? Well, two basic things. They have a body and a vertebral arch. So, vertebral body, that's the weight-bearing function, this big wedge right here for the weight-bearing function. They're stacked on top of one another through those intervertebral discs. Okay, so you know, just big body. It's filled with trabecular bone, though, and if you look at it in cross-section. Compact bone on the outside, trabecular bone on the inside. And then you have what's called the vertebral arch. Sometimes it's called the neural arch, because it forms an arch over what's inside there, which is usually the spinal cord. Vertebral arch, sometimes called the neural arch. Encloses the spinal cord. Now to illustrate it, it's round on this picture, but there's two parts to it. There's a part that kind of goes anteriorly like that. And those are called the pedicles. Which means foot. They attach to the body right here and right here. But then they kind of arch over this way. And those are called the lamina. And then you have all of these processes coming off of a vertebra. There's 7 of them. Call them the vertebral processes. You have pedicles and lamina. And you have vertebral processes. Process is a thing sticking out. There's 7. Okay, you got 1. It's called the spinous process. It's the one sticking posteriorly, dorsally. right there, right in the middle. Spinous process. Let me just draw straight back. Then you have two sticking out to the side in the transverse region. So they're called transverse processes. Two of them. Transverse. They stick out to the side this way. Okay, the other four are too hard to show in using a two-dimensional picture. So, but let's review. If I said identify, I put it right here, what would you call it? In the body. What about here and here? Pedicles, and these, well, they're more flat-like. Those are the lamina, and they merge here. So that process sticking down and back, spinous process, these are transverse. So the other two, there's actually two here and two, they're called there's four articular processes. Let me write it on the board and then I'll show you. So there's four articular processes. Remember what articular means in skeleton? It means how the bones touch each other, how they connect. So these are how the vertebrae stack on top of one another. Okay. So these three up here, these processes, they're good for muscles and ligaments to pull on them to act as levers. But the articular processes are so the vertebra can stack in a column. Okay? So you need two superior articular processes. Can't draw it here, I'm going to erase this picture. They're superior. So let's look at this vertebra from the side, a lateral view. So there's a side view. This one happens to be from the thoracic region. Here's my vertebral body from the side. There's my transverse process, and there's my spinous process. And do you see these two things sticking up? There's two of them. Those are the two superior articular processes. And they articulate to the vertebra above it. Let's look at it from behind. Let me highlight it. You see what's highlighted in green? That's part of the superior articular process. Those are actually the facets of the process. And I don't have that in your study guide. It always confuses students. A facet, like on a diamond ring, is the flat edge where they cut. And the facet is like this sparkle. And anyways, this is where it actually articulates with the bone above it. And I want you to notice that they face backward, they face posteriorly. So the two articular processes, they face posteriorly. Always orient yourself. This is posterior, right? You can feel the spinous processes. Like if you bend your neck forward, you feel like all the way down as far as you can reach, those bumps. Those are your spinous processes. Okay, then you have two inferior articular processes. Let me see if I can highlight them. Highlight the whole thing. See those two things highlighted in green? Those are the facets of the two inferior articular processes. Well, they articulate to the vertebra below it, and they face anteriorly. Articulate to vertebra below it. Face anteriorly. So count them. How many did we do? 7. Yeah, 4, 6, 7. Okay, so that's 7. So I'm using the multi-select function again. So again, once you explode them, what I want you to see by me exploding it is, see this one? Identify. Superior articular process. It faces backwards, because when it articulates with this one, it faces forward. So this superior articular process articulates with the inferior articular process, the one above it. So that's why the inferior ones, they basically face forward, and these face more or less backwards. So that when they come together, they articulate. And in the lab, what you ought to do for the ones that are strung up, you should go like, oh yeah, that one touches that. Oh yeah, that one touches that. That's kind of what I do to see it. You kind of see how they touch. All right, so that's what I show you here. The superior articular facet faces posteriorly, and then the inferior articular facet faces anteriorly. Now let's go through the different regions so you can learn the different regional characteristics. So without showing you the whole thing, if you know it's C1 to C7, what region is that? In the neck, yeah. So I have a few pictures here. Do you know what view this is? Front, side, back, side view. I just want to make sure you're oriented. And if you're ever confused by a picture, we have these in the lab so you can kind of look. Oh yeah, it does kind of look like that. Okay, so you can always use the skeletons as a guide. But you should be able to study bones articulated, like this picture on the left, and disarticulated, a single bone by itself. Okay. So now let's get away from the general characteristics and go just for the regional characteristics. So you should know all of those characteristics, vertebral body, vertebral arch, all those processes, for any vertebra of any of those three regions, cervical, thoracic, lumbar. But what are the characteristics unique to each region? Regional characteristics, cervical vertebra. Now the cervical region, you got 7, C1 to C7. You know, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they all kind of look like each other. So they call C3 through C6 the typical vertebra from this region. They all more or less look like this. C3 through C6 are typical. And so what is that? What makes it typical? Well, let's look at what they have in common with everything else. Vertebral body, vertebral arch, and you got these different processes here. Now, some things that are different. Look at the spinous process. You see how it's forked? That's unusual for this region. You don't see it anywhere else. We call that bifid. So they have a forked or bifid spinous process. That's one way you can tell they're in the cervical region. Bifid spinous process. Now look at the transverse processes. They have this widened area with a hole in it. So the transverse processes have transverse foramen. They have a hole in it. You only see that here in the neck region. Transverse processes have transverse foramen. That's the structure. You don't see that anywhere else. What goes through there, the vertebral artery, it branches off the subclavian, it goes up the neck. Okay. Well, you see it in a picture here. The red structure is the vertebral artery, and it's shown on our models as well. They show there's a red structure in the cervical region that you can see, which models the vertebral artery ascending up the transverse foramen. Vertebral artery. Well, they teach arteries in 431, but you're going to know that one now because we're learning the neck bones. Vertebral artery ascends up neck through transverse foramen. The vertebral artery, it will actually enter the base of the skull to supply blood to the brain. Enters base of skull to provide blood to brain. That's important. You only have 2 arteries that enter the skull to supply blood to the brain. One is that one, the vertebral artery. The other one is the internal carotid. Okay. So notice how I use the word ascends. Why didn't I say descends? Because I like to talk about blood vessels in the direction blood is flowing. Blood is pumped by what organ? The heart. And where's your heart? In your chest. Your head's up here, so you got to pump blood up. I use the word ascends. And another vertebral artery. Okay, well, what else? I think that's about it. Yeah. Now there's a picture of a sort of a typical one, labels on, labels off, so you can kind of study. I like this picture here. It shows the, well, I shouldn't have to tell you. It's inside there, so what is it? Spinal cord, and you can see the spinal nerves exiting there. Well, you should be able to identify that too inside there. Vertebral artery. Here's a side view of a cervical vertebra, labels on, labels off, so you can study. And here are a couple of atypical vertebra, the C1, C2, atlas, axis. So we're still in the cervical region. So the typical ones, C3 to C6, and the atypical ones, well, that will be C1, C2, C7. Usually I don't spend time teaching the atypical ones, but for these I do. So you need to know C1, the atypical ones. C1 has a name, Atlas. He was a Greek character, Atlas, who carried the world on the back of his neck. So this articulates with your skull. It forms what's called the atlanto-occipital joint with your skull. Now what you don't know yet maybe is that the occipital bone, that's the base of the skull. So, you know, this is forming a joint with the base of your skull. It's a joint. So if you're to get a skull, let me get a skull here. Hello, skull. You see these superior articular processes? See how big they are? So note that for C1. It's very large superior articular processes. So what these superior articular processes do, they literally articulate with the occipital condyles. So here's the base of the skull there. Two condyles there, and here's look how big that picture is, but look how big it really is. Here's C1. Right here. Very small. So your whole noggin is sitting on top of that very small bone. And it fits right. Now these are from different people, but oh yeah, it's still a pretty good fit. It's right there. Now this joint rocks back and forth this way. So that joint, we say it allows yes moving. It allows your head to move like this, like when you say yes.
Is that what's damaged when you have whiplash?
Well, yeah. Could be that. Could be other bones in the region too. All right. So allows this movement, yes movement. Then you got C2 axis. Now that has a vertebral body. Well, actually, I didn't really say that for Atlas. Notice how Atlas, there's no vertebral body. You should probably put that it's not there. That's very atypical. No body. C2 axis has a body and there's a thing sticking up. It's called the dens. So note the dens, also called odontoid process. I've seen both. Now that word root means tooth. It looks like a tooth. Here's another picture, C1, C2. Here's the side view of C2 I want you to see. You can see the spinous process sticking out posteriorly, but sticking up superiorly is the dens. This will actually stick up into C1 where there's no vertebral body. Okay. Sticks up into C1 provides a pivot point. You know, it provides an axis to pivot. That's why it's called axis. C2 provides an axis, quote unquote, for C1 to rotate like this from side to side, right? Here's a picture of C1 and C2 together on the next slide. So look at the picture on the right. It's a posterior view, but what you're seeing is that the dens of C2 sticks up to where it is in C1 because there's no body, so it has room to stick up, and it twists from side to side like this. Like that's why we call it no movement. Like when you say no, as in no, not in absence of movement. Students always get confused. I have in my notes there's no movement. I thought it could move. No, like this is going like this, move like this. Like we say no. Like yes, no, like that. Allows no movement. Quote, unquote. I know someone's going to ask me that. Yes, no. And, well, that joint has a name. Before we called it the atlanto-occipital joint. This joint is called the atlanto-axial joint because it's a joint between C1 and C2. So no, let me write up here. I'm running out of room down here. C2 forms the atlanto-axial joint with C1. For the no movement. All right, the last one is C7. So see that little picture inset? You can palpate it. The spinous process of C7 is so prominent that they call C7 the vertebral prominence. So feel the base of your neck. The biggest bump at the base of your neck, that be C7. I can feel mine right there. Is it that one or that? It's probably this one. It's always good when you can palpate things on your body to give you a better sense of your own anatomy at least. Of course, you're not allowed to palpate other people, right? So make sure that's clear. So C7 is called Vertebral Columns because the spinous process is so long. It's not bifid. It's just a big stump at the very end. Where is it? Oh yeah, there it is. It has a long, slender spinous process. It's not bifid like the typical ones. Let's take a break, come back at 9.